Hey everyone, it's Stu Staudinger here again. Real Canadian Liberal podcast, looking at science. What's that got to do with being a liberal? Well, empiricism is kind of a liberal thing. And modern science is about empirical investigation. I guess the use of empirical science. So we're going down the scientific route because that's my background. We'll get to the philosophy a bit later. But I promised in the introduction that we're going to start off with a look at a research study published in 1973, and I'll just bring it up here so you can have a quick look at it. I'm not going to scroll all the way through it, but you can read it there, you can find it. Long story short, this was an incident. I say an incident. Yeah, it was an incident, I guess, that occurred at the British Antarctic Survey research station on Adelaide Island, which is about 1,600 miles south of the southern tip of South America. And they were back in late 1968, 12 scientists went down there to do the Antarctic winter. And so 17 weeks later, sometime in 1969, one of the 12 base staff came down with a respiratory virus, a cold of some kind. Whether it was a coronavirus or a rhinovirus, we're not sure. But anyway, they never did isolate the virus. But the point was, 17 weeks in, which is 4 months and 1 week in the most lockdown of lockdowns in history, 1,600 nautical miles, or 1,600 miles, or maybe not nautical miles, 1,600 miles from southern tip of South America on an island in the middle of an Antarctic winter. It's kind of hard to be more locked down than that. They had a viral outbreak. Now, this is not surprising to people who have studied virology, because we've known for a long time, 60, 70 years, that trying to control viral outbreaks using non-pharmaceutical interventions like lockdowns can't work. And the reason for that is covered by Dr. Hope Simpson in his 1992 book on the transmission of epidemic influenza. He was a British researcher who started the first lab on influenza transmission in 1933, published his work in 92. But anyway, long story short, we got 100 years of research on this. In 2019, all the best scientific minds of the world got together and updated the World Health Organization's pandemic guidelines, and reflecting all that science, including the research of Hope Simpson. And they said don't use these methods because they won't work. We can get into the science behind that. It's called dormancy. We won't cover it right now, but long story short, you can't hide from this stuff. You can run, but you can't hide, and running won't help either. And this is part of the problem. You have to have a strategy that works with the science. We don't have a strategy that works with the science, or we haven't used one in the last year in the Western world, because as this case right here shows, you can't use lockdowns against respiratory viruses. It won't work. You might be able to delay transmission by a small amount, but the problem with that is you delay transmission amongst the healthy, you increase the relative transmission rate in the vulnerable. And by doing that, you kill more vulnerable people. So it's not a strategy that you want to use unless you are seriously being overwhelmed, and the main danger is overwhelming your medical system, which we've never been at. And people say, oh, but we're running close to overwhelming the medical system. And, well, in particular, in Alberta, that's total garbage. I'll bring up this graph right here. And you guys can have a look at this. But that is 2001 to 2021 in Alberta, Canada. That's Stats Canada data in all-cause mortality, deaths per million per day. And if you notice, we have had winter viral seasons, which come around every winter. We have had 6 that have been as bad or worse than COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes coronavirus. SARS-CoV-2 causes COVID-19. We've had 5 others, so that was the 6th in 20 years that are as bad or worse. 2018 actually had a 32% higher excess mortality rate in Alberta than 2020. And the peak in 2020 occurred 8 weeks before the first lockdowns. That's right, 8 weeks. And people say, oh yeah, but then there was a secondary peak in March and everything else. Well, yeah, there was a secondary peak in March in 2004. There was also one in 2002. There was another secondary peak in 2008. Oh yeah, and there was a little one in 2007. The point being, coronaviruses peak after influenza viruses. That's always the case. So if you have an early drop-off, it means you had a flu-dominated season. If you have a late drop-off, then it means you got some influence of coronaviruses. And if you got a really early rise, then it's a rhinovirus, as a general rule. This happens every year, and it's happened every year for millions of years. And if you look at Swedish data, and the Swedes have got the best data set on Earth, it goes all the way back to 1851, but they've had around about 20 equivalent viral seasons to the 2020 season since 1951. So both in Alberta and in Sweden, this is a once every 3.5 years thing. This is not a once a century. It's not even once a decade. It's not even once every 5 thing. It's once every 3.5 years that we have this. So why the panic? Because if you look right here, 18.1 deaths per million per day. So that's the baseline's around about just over 15. So it's about 3 deaths per million per day. Excess mortality. It was at 19.5 in January 2018. It was at 18.8 in January 17, both higher. Now, obviously, it lasted longer this last year because it was a coronavirus-dominated season, which continues on and drops off in April, as opposed to the flu one, which drops off in February. But anyway, the point being, the peak. When you're talking about saving your medical personnel, the peak is what you're talking about, and we have never had a problem. So if people say that we've had a problem, I defy you to find it in the stats, because Stats Canada can't find the problem. I can tell you that much. So there you go. So, yeah, we're talking about a regular occurrence. That's what happened this last year. Except it wasn't a regular occurrence because we threw science out the window. And let me just give you a little bit of guidance. So I've already said NPI's lockdowns don't work. 100 years of research saying they don't work. And then by September last year, just in 2020 alone, another 23 scientific papers saying that none of them worked. Even though the scientists were telling politicians back in March last year that they weren't going to work. But instead they trusted a bunch of experts. Well, who were these experts? Well, these experts were mostly bureaucrats. People who haven't done science properly, probably in at least a couple decades. They're not current scientists. So, anyway, the governments in the West decided to follow computer models rather than the actual real data that was being logged at the time. We had the data by the end of February last year to make sensible decisions, and they ignored it all and trusted computer models published by a guy in Imperial College London who has had his computer models going wrong ever since BSE back in whenever that was, 2001 or 2, or in the UK. He's never had anything right in his entire career, so he's hardly the scientist to be talking to, but they're still trotting him out to excuse their incompetence. Anyway, what happened? Well, so far about 22,000 Canadians have died of COVID-19, or with COVID-19, depending on which, because 96% of the people in Canada who have died of COVID-19 were already dying. That's right, they had comorbidities, most of them over 3. If you have a morbidity, that means you're going to die. Well, everyone's going to die, but the point is they're not healthy people. Most of them were in nursing homes, where we could have protected them, but we didn't. So instead of protecting the vulnerable, we locked down the people who weren't at risk. And when I say not at risk, if you're under the age of 40 in Canada, you're more likely to die driving to work tomorrow than die of a coronavirus, COVID-19, if you get exposed to SARS-CoV-2. And if you're under the age of 20, you are more likely to get struck by lightning this year than die of coronavirus. It's that simple. Last year, there were zero Canadians under the age of 20 died of COVID-19. So more people got struck by lightning under the age of 20. So, there you go. That's the relative risk. And yet we're trotting out vaccines that are killing 1 in 55,000. So, the death toll, if you're under the age of 20, from vaccines will be higher than the death toll from COVID-19. Not a good thing. And here's the point. We could have saved, out of those 22,000 Canadians, how many could we have saved? It's an estimation, but probably 15,000. Now, would they have lived through the rest of the year? Possibly not, because lots of them were very ill anyway and probably only had a few months to live. The average life expectancy of someone moving into a nursing home in Canada is just under 12 months. It's 11 months in some days. So they don't have a lot to live, but them dying 3 or 4 months early, whatever, losing that last little bit of time that they have with their family, is a tragedy. And it could have been avoided for a lot of them, but it wasn't. And Canada rates 30th out of the 30 most developed countries in the world in terms of their protection of the elderly. It's not good. Not good by any measure. So anyway, as I said, by September 2020, we had 23 scientific papers in the scientific literature, papers and articles written proving that non-pharmaceutical interventions didn't work. They didn't work in the springtime at all. They had virtually zero impact. Now, there's a few that do have an impact. The ones that the WHO actually recommends, like washing your hands, not visiting people if you're symptomatic of a respiratory virus. All the sort of common sense things we do every year in flu season. If you got the flu, don't go visit Granny. That's fine. But all the other stuff, locking people down, closing businesses, has no beneficial effect, but has huge collateral damage. Now, what is collateral damage? We hear about collateral damage when somebody's Air Force drops a bomb somewhere and innocent people get killed. Basically, it's a really nice way of saying we accidentally killed somebody, or we accidentally destroyed their lives, or we accidentally destroyed their business while trying to do something else. The reality is the collateral damage from lockdowns or non-pharmaceutical interventions against SARS-CoV-2 have been enormous. I'll just list a few of them just so you get an idea. By the end of 2020, just due to lockdowns, we had starved 1 million African children to death. That's according to the what do they call them? UNICEF. Okay, 1 million African children starved to death. That's children under the age of 12. That doesn't include any adults or teenagers or anything else. So children under the age of 12, 1 million of them. We pushed by October 2020, we pushed 135 million people into food insecurity, i.e. at the risk of starvation worldwide. 135 million. That's a lot. So we doubled the number of people in the world who are starving. And we did that in less than a year. So from March last year through until September last year. The World Food Program, some interesting stats just recently. They estimate that the starvation loss due to lockdown measures, or the knock-on downstream effects of lockdowns, the loss of economic activity worldwide, will eventually reach 36 million. That means we will kill an order of magnitude more people just through to lockdown-related starvation than COVID-19 will. Because COVID-19 will never get to the stage of killing 3.5 million people. It just won't. It's done. It's dusted. It's an endemic disease like all the others. And like H1N1 that's just floating around out there now. SARS-CoV-1, MERS, and all these other things. Right? So, 36 million dead for what? So a few people could feel better, sit in their basement, not work, and because they're scared of the boogeyman. It's just superstition. It's literally being scared of the boogeyman. As my daughter told her teacher, it's a bunch of adults being scared of monsters in the closet, and there is no better way to put it. And we kill 36 million people through starvation as a result of that. Anyway, what else? Suicide, mental health problems in the Western world going across. In the U.S., last year, 1 in 4 people, 1 in 4 youth considered suicide. That's insane. Through the roof across the Western world. Massive public debt, enslaving a future generation, and compromising that generation's education in the process, so they're less capable of actually handling that debt load because they won't have the earning capacity. It's insane. Industrial concentration. The single biggest contributor towards wealth inequality in the world is industrial concentration. Right? And what have we done in the last year? We've increased it massively in almost every industrial sector across the world. We've put all the small businesses out of work, the people who actually employ people, and the large corporations per capita who employ fewer people have made billions. We've made billionaires richer, and we've made the poor poorer. As Dr. Navarro of the World Health Organization stated, we made the rich richer and the poor poorer. That's not good. So anyway, that's what's happened in 2020. that's what we're going to talk about. So what are we going to look at in the next video? Well, the next video, I'm going to kind of canter through what I've been doing about this in the last year, frustratingly with very little visible signs of success. Well, success in some areas, but lack of success in others. The politicians are still breaking the law. It's that simple. Now we've got more and more people that are aware of it, and there's a growing public outcry against it. But that's where we're at. So in the next video, we'll talk about what I've done in the last year, and introduce you to some of the work I've done. And it's the basis of that work that'll we'll cover in the next few videos, and the effects on our society and our human rights and civil liberties. And we'll go from there. So without further ado, I'm going to sign off, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Thanks for coming along. Okay, bye.